Hello my friends, and welcome. This is the story about the deportation of us Irish to Australia during the 19th century. Around 40,000 Irish convicts were transported to Australia between 1791 and 1867, including at least 325 who had participated in either the Irish Rebellion of 1798, the Rebellion of 1803 or the Young Ireland skirmishes in 1848. Once in Australia, some were involved in the 1804 Castle Hill Convict Rebellion. Continual tension on Norfolk Island in the same year also led to an Irish revolt. Both risings were soon crushed. As late as the 1860s, Fenian prisoners were being transported, particularly to Western Australia, where the Catalpa rescue of Irish radicals off Rockingham was a memorable episode. The Catalpa rescue involved the escape, on the 17th to the 19th of April 1876, of 6 Irish Fenian prisoners from the then British penal colony of Western Australia. They were sent on the convict ship, Hougoumont, arriving at Fremantle on the 9th of January 1868, at the convict establishment, now Fremantle Prison. In 1869, pardons had been issued to many of the imprisoned Fenians. Another round of pardons were issued in 1871, after which only a small group of military Fenians remained in Western Australia's penal system. In 1874, one of them managed to smuggle out a letter to America, where it came into the hands of John Boyle O'Reilly, who had escaped earlier. He mounted a rescue operation involving the purchase of the merchant bark Catalpa. It dropped anchor in international waters off Rockingham and dispatched a whaleboat to shore. At 8:30 in the morning, 6 Fenians who were working in work parties outside the prison walls, Thomas Darragh, Martin Hogan, Michael Harrington, Thomas Hassett, Robert Granston, and James Wilson, all successfully absconded and made it back to America. Other than prisoners, most of the laborers who voluntarily emigrated to Australia in the 19th century were drawn from the poorest sector of British and Irish society. After 1831, the Australian colonies employed a system of government assistance, in which all or most immigration costs were paid for chosen immigrants. The colonial authorities used these schemes to exercise some control over immigration. While these assisted schemes were biased against the poorest elements of society, the extremely poor could overcome these hurdles in several ways, such as relying on local assistance or help from relatives. Most Irish emigrants to Australia were free settlers. The 1891 census of Australia counted 228,000 Irish born. At the time, the Irish made up about 27% of the immigrants from the British Isles. The number of people born in Ireland but now in Australia peaked in 1891. A decade later, the number of Ireland-born people had dropped to 184,035. Dominion status for the Irish Free State in 1922 did not diminish arrivals from Ireland, as Irish people were still British subjects. This changed after the Second World War, as people migrating from the new Republic of Ireland, which came into being in April 1949, were no longer British subjects eligible for the assisted passage. People from Northern Ireland continued to be eligible for this as they were still British citizens. Only during the 1960s did migration from the south of Ireland reduce significantly. It has been argued that Irish Australians and Aboriginal people, including those of mixed descent, feel that there is a historical and sentimental link between the two groups. The shared oppression of Aboriginal and Irish people by the British is seen as giving them common historical ground. The historian Patrick O'Farrell argued that, in contrast to other colonists, Irish Catholics treated the Aborigines as equals, as evidenced by their willingness to intermarry, thus giving rise to the Irish surnames prominent among Aboriginal activists. This argument has been questioned. It has been pointed out that under the new colonial and state administrations, A European-style surname was required for official records relating to Aboriginal people. The local police, often of Irish stock, collected the relevant census data and allocated their own names to Aboriginal people for official purposes. In addition, however, many such policemen fathered children to casual or long-term partners from Aboriginal communities. The assumption that the Irish were less violent than other colonists has also been questioned, since Irishmen were among the bushrangers, squatters, police, timber getters and others known for violence against Aborigines. Over 4,000 young female orphans from workhouses in Ireland were shipped to the Australian colonies at the time of the famine, to meet a demand for domestic servants. Some settlers greeted them with hostility and some were exploited or abused by employers. Although a number eventually died in poverty, others made upwardly mobile marriages, often surviving older husbands to experience long widowhoods. The Catholic Church only became involved in the 1870s, when its relief agencies in England were overwhelmed with Irish immigration. Even so, only about 10% of the resettlements were through Catholic agencies until after World War II. Australian Catholic groups began importing children in the 1920s to increase the Catholic population, and became heavily engaged in placing and educating them after World War II. The practice quietly died out during the 1950s and 60s. The first convicts and soldiers to arrive in Australia included a large number of Irish speakers, an example being Private Patrick Geary, who in 1808 acted as court interpreter for Patrick Henson, a convict accused of theft. An account from 1800 refers to convicts speaking Irish among themselves, this being regarded as evidence of conspiracy, and it was acknowledged in the 1820s that priests could not perform their duties in the colony of New South Wales without a knowledge of the language. There is a reference to Irish-speaking bushrangers in Van Diemen's Land in the early 19th century. The gold rushes of the 1850s attracted many Irish to the colony of Victoria, with a high proportion of Irish speakers. An Irish-speaking priest, Father Stack, was appointed to minister to Irish miners in the gold rush locality of Bendigo. Irish immigration was at its height in the 1860s, the main counties of origin being Clare, Tipperary, Limerick and Kilkenny, all of them areas where the language was still strong. Irish continued to be spoken in Australian country districts where the Irish had settled, and there is some evidence of it being transmitted to the next generation. Irish immigrant communities in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Great Britain respect the issues of identity and Irishness. Religion remained the major cause of differentiation in all Irish diaspora communities, and had the greatest impact on identity, followed by the nature and difficulty of socio-economic conditions faced in each new country, and the strength of continued social and political links of Irish immigrants and their descendants with the old country. From the late 20th century onward, Irish identity abroad became increasingly cultural, non-denominational, and non-political. For much of the 19th and the 20th centuries, Irish Australians, particularly but not exclusively Catholics, were treated with suspicion in a sectarian atmosphere. The outlaw Ned Kelly, 1855–80, achieved the status of a national folk hero. Ballads, films and paintings have since 1878 perpetuated the legend. Kelly, who was hanged for murder, is often viewed romantically as the sort of treatment Irish Catholics in Australia could expect. In reality, however, most of the Irish were urban workers who experienced less official discrimination in Australia than they had at home in Ireland, and many Irish Australians, Catholic and Protestant, rose to positions of wealth and power in the colonial hierarchy. Many Irish men, for example, entered law, the judiciary and politics, and in Ned Kelly's time, 80% of the Victorian police were Irish-born, and half of those had served in the Royal Irish Constabulary. In major cities such as Melbourne and Sydney, Irish social and political associations were created, including the Melbourne Celtic Club, which survives today. The Irish settler in Australia, both voluntary and forced, was crucial to the survival and prosperity of the early colonies both demographically and economically. 300,000 Irish free settlers arrived between 1840 and 1914. By 1871, the Irish were a quarter of all overseas born. And that, my friends, is another story about how us Irish helped build the world. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.